I'm Ray. I'm a carpenter and I specialise in traditional woodwork for the built environment. And I live in a cabin in the woods. So initially I started living in a van and did a van conversion because I think I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And it gave me the freedom to figure that out without the pressures of rent. I was 20 when I bought my first van. It just made so much sense. There were so many things I was interested in. I had no idea where I wanted to live, what I wanted to do. I think I've always been someone that needs a lot of solo time. And so having a space that's just mine and not having to live with other people just made a lot of sense. But then as I was building it, learning these skills and realising that I could make a space that was entirely mine and I could pick everything down to the minutest detail, which is something that so few people get the privilege of doing, like what my light switches look like, what my floor is, the arrangement of everything. And I just completely fell in love with it, and the idea of going back from that just never really made any sense. I started with the carpentry of the van and I just couldn't stop. I wanted to learn everything. I was carving spoons and making brushes and, doing basic stuff, putting up shelves. And I had this thirst for it that just couldn't be quenched. And I'm still finding that, there's so much to learn. And I think then how empowering it was to be able to make your own space and to know that I could potentially build anything I wanted. It gives you freedom. And so I just wanted to keep learning, and I also wanted to make this possible for other people, because when I started building a van, I didn't know anyone that lived in a van. I didn't really know anyone that could teach me the skills. I taught myself everything. I taught myself how to wire a solar setup and install a diesel heater and put in a window, and it was actually really hard to learn that stuff. It took a really long time. I didn't know where to find the information, and then I started making friends with people who also wanted to do the same thing, and it was like, I don't want them to feel how I felt, which is quite isolated in that and the struggle. And it was a necessary struggle, and it's got me where I am today, but then making it easier for other people. I've been freelance for the last 3 or 4 years, and somehow my projects seem to be mostly cabins and saunas and these wooden structures that are maybe off-grid or maybe they're on a trailer. And then within that I have been trying to focus more on teaching and trying to make woodwork more accessible, because it is a very male-dominated industry, and there's a lot of us who have been historically excluded, including people of colour and trans people. I love what I do. I am constantly inspired by it, but it's quite often really difficult because of the attitudes that are pervasive in the industry. And so doing what I can to combat that in any small way that I can. After a good 5 years or so of living in the van, I knew that I could never afford to buy a house, or at least I couldn't at the time. Feels a little bit more possible now. And I never wanted to. I never wanted that lifestyle. And so it felt like a natural progression to build a cabin or build a tiny house. Because the thing about a van is that if anything happens to the engine, you're screwed. And you're relying on it for your housing and also to get you to work, and all of your possessions are in it, and it's really good for a short period. It makes so much in your life possible, but it doesn't have a huge amount of longevity. And yeah, I wanted to be investing in something for my future and build something that could give back so much in the future and give me a kind of life that I felt really unattainable when I was in my 20s. I'm still in my 20s, but when I was in my early 20s. So I ran it as a community build when I first started it. I'd been planning it for 3 years, and I'd started telling people a year in advance. But September 2022, I'm going to be running this build for 8 weeks, and I will provide camping and food. Just come, I'll teach you. But it's all about the joy of building. I'm not asking you to give me X amount of labour. I just want you to come and share in this build, because so few people get the opportunity to build something. And so the design of the carcass, the structure itself was relatively simple to aid that. And yeah, the plan was to get that done in 6 to 8 weeks. And then once that was finished, it was like a fully contained, like dry shell. Then I could spend all the time in the world making all the furniture inside. And yeah, making it, as craftspeople, we very rarely get the opportunity to really spend the time and to do things how we really want to do them. And so it just made perfect sense to do that in my house, because I may never get the opportunity again. I have quite grand ambitions for culture around the building industry. I think it is quite antiquated, and I want more diversity. And I want more diversity across all levels. I think quite often we think that just having an introductory role is doing enough. Like, if we get more people through the door, then our work is done. And it's not just inviting people through that door, it's what you do once they're in the building. It's how you're making safe work environments, how you're dealing with conflict, and getting more diversity in managing roles is really what's going to be changing the culture, which is quite difficult in an industry that feels set in its ways. I think it's going to take turning it on its head. I think maybe we can't disassemble it from the inside. We need to create alternatives, and we need more female-owned and people of colour owned businesses, rather than trying to get into these pre-established businesses and change them from within. I would love to see some unions. Quite a lot of us are freelance and we have very little rights, and so I'm trying to push setting up a union for historically excluded woodworkers. I run this little group for historically excluded woodworkers called Woodworkers Alliance, and we have 100 members, and it's been going for a year, and it's, I think, the single greatest thing I've ever done. So much better than this house. Building connections with other woodworkers who are struggling in similar ways has been incredible, and I want to see all of these people thrive, and currently it feels really difficult, and it will benefit everyone. Suicide rates are much higher in men, and even higher in men in the construction industry. They're one of the highest. It's tragic, and it doesn't need to be. And I think that we can create much more supportive, empowering work sites. I've been on builds where it's possible. I think quite often with deadlines and budgets and outside constraints, it feels like your hands are tied, and they're not. We have to do better. And I'm trying to do better.